Alright, as you can see, some changes have happened since the last video. The treble pot was bad, the bass pot was bad. Those have been changed. We now have signal here. Both switches were bad. This one had just failed completely. This one was intermittent. Neither was repairable. Some new switchcraft jacks are on the way. I've got the one on the right, the bass channel that I'm plugged into now, hardwired for the deep mode. I always forget which way is deep, which way isn't. Let's only undeep it, or deep it, depending on which way it's working. So with that wire disconnected, also has a lot more gain. So that's quite nice. On the other channel, I took everything off to clean it and redo the jack and pot connections and all that stuff and clean the front panel. But aside from that switch, nothing needed any work. So all that's as you heard it before. There were two other things, one of which I've already fixed and the other one's next up on the agenda. First, with the 220K resistors in the local feedback loops from the plates, at present, the old ones, there was a pulse in the background noise of the amp. And just on a hunch, I lifted those and that went away. And so it's got a new pair of 220Ks there. I've not finalized the install. I've got to remove some excess solder from these and do a right angle bend for better connection. But this was just a test to make sure there wasn't some other problem in the circuit that was only heard or only audible or made itself known when those resistors were in place. But in fact, it was one or both of the old resistors were bad. The other thing is the bias circuit. Right now, as the amp is, with 116 volts coming out of the wall, the tubes are idling at about 20% plate dissipation. And that's because the circuit, the bias circuit, and an AB165 and later Fenders is a bias balance, not a bias level. So I can control the bias ratio from one output tube to the next, and it's mostly just audible as hum if you get it wrong. There's more hum. There's less. There's more hum. So right there in the middle is a nice place for it to be. Now I've got even matching between the output tubes, and the hum in the output's gone, but they're still bias cold. So this resistor is about to be replaced with a little thing I like to do in these, where you can keep the bias balance, but still have bias level, and we can get these much, much warmer than 20% dissipation. I tend to aim for 50 to 65%, depending on the playing styles and such, but in stock form, that is not possible, but it soon will be. All right, now, with the addition of this little additional trem pot, replacing the fixed resistor to ground in series with a new resistor, I can control the bias level and the bias balance. So right now the tubes are each at about 58% idle dissipation, and the hum is at a null point, which means each output tube is drawing just about the same amount of current. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be the point where you have good common mode cancellation, so you're not hearing the hum, because the noise is what's common to the two sides, and the noise is out of phase, and when it's exactly the same amount of, the noise level is exactly the same on each one, out of phase, it cancels out. Leaves us with just signal, no noise, much better sound, which I will prove to you in a moment. As far as the video goes, it'll be tomorrow as far as the recording of this goes, because my lovely wife has a cold, and she is asleep in the other room. So I don't think a 50-watt Bassman is really the thing to do at the moment, but I'm really pleased with how it's coming out. So let me take a little bit of time to talk about those local feedback resistors again. So this is the AB165 Bassman, and its circuit in the output section is unique among Fenders of this era. It has a very different approach to getting negative feedback and how all that's accomplished. Sometimes these 22 nanofarad output coupling caps can be a little bit leaky because they're 400 volt caps in a section that can exceed 400 volts unloaded. That's a common point of failure in these, but in this case they still test just fine. In addition to the negative feedback, which is, even though it's done a different way, that's something in common with most other fenders from this era, it also has local feedback from the plate of each output tube to the plate of the phase inverter stage, which is driving that side of the output tubes. It's really not an optimal design. A lot of things in this were kind of an experiment to see what they could do, if they could skin a cat a different way. It can be noisy, and the transition from clean to dirt can be a little bit grainy or abrupt, and I'll find out how this is sounding tomorrow now that it's playable. But before I did any changes to take it away from being a pure AB165, first I wanted to bring it back to being a good example of a restored AB165, and then I'll talk to the owner if he wants me to make any further changes. I've done that on a lot of other amps. My preference, and what I think Leo and the guys should have built, was the AB165 preamp changes, but with the older AA864 phase inverter and output section. I have done that, and you get an amp that has a much lower noise floor than even a healthy AB165, and the transition from clean to breakup to overdrive is a little smoother and feels better as a player. But, that's not my call to make yet. I'll talk to the owner, show him these videos, but first I just wanted to get this thing back up and running. So right now it's back up and running, and tomorrow, from my perspective, in just a second from yours, you'll get to hear it. All right, a few things have changed on the 66 Bassman since the last bit you saw. Got the new switches installed for the deep and bright options. These are switchcrafts. It's got a new pair of TAD 606 GC SDR output tubes because the very dirty, very old JJs were drawing too little current compared to a bunch of other 606s I had here. Rather than a generic Chinese 12AX7 in the phase inverter, it now has the correct 12AT7. I got a JAN, Joint Army-Navy surplus Philips new old stock 12AT7, which is nice. The three 12AX7 preamp tubes were two generics and an older Sovtech, and they were kind of hissy once all the other sources of noise were removed. It's like peeling an onion. So I will talk to the owner and see if he wants me to get some new 12AX7s for him. I happen to know this guy has a lot of amps, and he might have a stash of 12AX7s that he might prefer to roll himself, so I don't need to spend his money on that. But I know that he probably doesn't have a bunch of 12AT7s, and the JANs are still available for really good prices comparable to new production, so that was a no-brainer. Let's start with the bass channel. Let me grab a Les Paul here. The bass channel on this amp sounds really good. Let's start with the deep off, or deep on actually. And that is something that you would hear a lot better if you were playing bass through this, which we'll get to. It's just a very nice balanced sounding channel in deep mode though. If I take the deep off, you get a lot more low end in the guitar frequency range, and you get a lot more gain because a whole bunch of highs aren't being rolled off. That probably clipped the mic a little bit. When this thing is done for reals though and put back in its cab, we'll do a real playing video with the SM57, and that won't clip like the lav mic does. But That's a pretty nice sound, and that little bit of feedback was effortless. These things are really fun to play. And they respond really well to your guitar volume pipe. So that's nice. Let's switch over to an actual bass for the Bassman. And we're going to start in non-deep mode. Let me get everything dialed to noon. Go to deep mode. Now I'm running through my 2x12 cab, and you're hearing this with an off-axis lav mic from, about 8-10 feet away. So you're not going to get the full low end out of this. In fact, for the frequencies that this cab is good at, the non-deep mode sounds fuller. How's that go? Anyway, I'll practice later. But, you know, this does the whole thumping 60s bass sound. Very nice. Let's switch over to the, quote, normal channel. Let me switch to a Strat. This is my rosewood board Strat with the bridge humbucker and the floating trim that you heard in the video for the Black Star yesterday. Let's see, I had the treble up just a little bit there. I'm turning it to a neutral. Some scratchiness. See if that's the tube or not. I'll get to that in a second. With the new switch, the bright works. I'm gonna turn the treble down, make that a little more bearable. Turn the bright off, the treble back up to neutral. I get accused of noodling or playing random things or not playing much of anything in these videos. I'm not here to play. I'm here to just make sounds and test how it sounds and feels. You can't get a sense of the feel unless you're playing it, but you can get a sense of the sound. And, you know, I could sit here and play a Steve Lukather lick perfectly and nail it, and the guys who are into jazz and country would hate it. I mean, realistically, you can't please everybody. I could have Pete Thorne here, and people are like, this other guy does it better. So I can't play the YouTube guitarist thing. I mean, yeah, Pete Thorne is a hell of a lot better than I am, but I notice he doesn't go around the internet slamming other players. And the pro players I know tend to judge things based on, just like this. I'm going to do a C add 9. That sustain, that note separation, the clarity. These are the things a pro player is looking for, because it doesn't matter if you're Pete Thorne or Andy Timmons or Tim Lurch. Everything else about the amp is subjective, and everything you do is different from the other guy. But they're all looking for something that, hey, this is the note. Does it speak? Does it breathe? Does it have interest? Right there, the amp's almost clean, and there's that feedback that wants to happen. If I were to move the guitar a little bit towards the speakers, I would have had feedback there without being at AC/DC levels. So, you know, if you're like, oh man, he didn't play anything, he didn't do Phrygian, blah, 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 blah. Nope, I don't care to. This is not about me. This is about the amps. And I've put several videos up of pro players using these things, and they sound great. And then at which point people say, man, a pro sounds great through anything. So some things you just can't win. I need to talk to the owner and see how perfect he wants it to be, and whether he wants me to further lower the noise floor and make some changes to the phase inverter and AA864 it. I suspect he's probably going to want to keep this one AB165 straight, because the amp was in a really bad condition and required a lot of cleaning, and the bill is already at a certain point. And it's a really good sounding example of an AB165. Just has that little bit of scratchiness going on, which needs to go away. So let me track that down and I'll report back, and then I'll talk to the owner. Here you can see I temped in a new cathode resistor here. The old one is still up in the air, just in case it was fine. But that is the cathode resistor for the first triode on the normal channel. And now that crackly sound is gone. When I lower the volume to 0 on the guitar, the remaining issue here is a slight rushing water noise, and it's exacerbated, as always, by the treble pot. That could be the plate resistor, which is original. It's not going to be the slope resistor, because that would affect all the noises on the treble. Could be a not dirty, but just a failing volume pot, though it seems okay. And the treble pot, the same. I don't think that's the issue. It could also be the mix resistor from that channel, which I believe is this one right here. Some microphonics in this entire area of the board. The grid on the input is also a little bit microphonic, which is not uncommon in these. And so now with that volume down, that tapping sound has gone away. That could be addressed by replacing the old cloth covered wire going from the volume and the input jacks to these grids here with shielded wire. Well, I cheated a little bit and took out a decoupling error the AB165 has. I'm not going to get too far into that here. Those of you who already know the circuit well can see it here. This thing's about as good as the stock AB165 can get. Only ways to get it better would be, first of all, to shield all the grids from the input jacks to the triodes and from the volume pots to the triodes and such. And the next level beyond that is changing the output section to AA864. Both those things are options I will present to the owner. But the amp is sounding really good, if I do say so myself. It sounds much better than most examples out there in the wild. You know, AB165s have their place, even with the noise floor issues. I'm satisfied right now that this one is a good sounding example of an AB165. It'd be better with shielded wires. Later Fenders had them. These did not. I think it makes sense to shield it, but it depends on what the owner wants. And I prefer the hybridized output section. And you can hear that in some of my other videos, but I'm not here to make the entire world dance to my tune. Not yet, anyway. Mwahaha!